Hey all, it's Krista Watson from Krista Quilts. Now earlier in this series, I showed you how to quilt a continuous round spiral with your walking foot. That was back in episode 24. In this video, I want to show you how you take that same idea, but rather than starting with a circle, you start off with a square instead. The result is a continuous square spiral quilted with your walking foot. That's exactly what I've done on this quilt behind me, but more about that a little bit later. For now, I want you to grab a copy of my book, 99 Machine Quilting Designs, a practice sample, and a sketch pad to take notes and doodle the design that I'm going to show you. I'm going to draw it out for you first and then quilt it out on my practice sample. So let's get started doing this fun design. The continuous walking foot square spiral is design number 23 from my book. I'm going to stitch a square in the middle to start my continuous square spiral, and then I need to continue an even amount all the way down and across to keep it straight and square. Now, the way I do this is I count my stitches. So let's say, for example, the distance between the edge of my foot and my needle is 4 to 5 stitches. So each time I go beyond the design, I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, continue stitching 1, 2, 3, 4, continue stitching 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth to keep it relatively straight. When I stitch it out, you'll see it's much straighter than I'm drawing it freehand. Once I finish the basic design, if I have extra room, I can just echo and continue. I'm going to do this with a walking foot so that I will need to stop and pivot each time I go around the square, but it makes for an interesting texture. To start stitching a continuous square spiral with your walking foot or built-in dual feed like I'm doing, first I need to stitch out my small center square. To keep the square even, you can watch me stitch exactly 4 stitches on all 4 sides of the quilt. That represents the distance between the edge of my foot and my needle. It takes about 4 stitches to fill in that amount of space. So the width of your line is going to depend on how much that spacing is going to be for you when you're quilting in your machine. Just remember, you can always quilt wider lines by changing needle positions if your machine can do that. And if you quilt wider lines, then you'll need to figure out how many stitches it'll take to create your center square. Usually it's about 4 or 5. When I get back to my starting point, now I need to count 4 more stitches beyond the edge to keep the pattern nice and straight. Then I'll stop with the needle down and rotate. So every time I pivot, I'm checking to see if the left edge of my foot is aligned next to my previous line of stitching. If so, I'll echo that line and then quilt 4 stitches beyond, then rotate again to keep the design square. Each time the design gets longer and longer and each line is a little bit longer around the center square, I'm going to add 4 stitches beyond, stop with the needle down, rotate, and continue stitching. I'm going to keep going like this to keep the pattern going. Now this can be a little slow and methodical, and it actually sounds more complicated than it is, but when you're actually practicing on your sample or a real quilt, it'll really make sense to you as you do it. So just stay with this design to produce a really cool result. Now when you are quilting this on a large quilt, the technique is the same, but it's just going to be a lot more starting, stopping, and scrunching up the quilt to keep it out of the way. Once the square that I've stitched gets a little bit bigger, the design is going to go a lot faster. Now, if you don't want to keep track of your stitches and count at each corner, you could mark out the entire design instead. Either way works, just remember to do what works for you. If you're quilting this design on a pieced square block, the seams can actually help keep you stitching straight. So there's lots of tricks you can try when quilting this design on a real quilt. Now, if for some reason one of your lines get a little bit off, that's okay too. You can embrace a wonky look to this design, and it's just another variation. Remember, there's no wrong designs, there's just different customizations that you can try. Now, if your lines tend to get a little bit wider, then keep them all a little bit wider, and it's going to look like you meant to do that. As you turn to check the location of your foot as you round each corner, remember you can always add an extra stitch if needed before quilting the next turn. Once you've quilted most of the block, you can then go back and echo quilt any open spaces to fill in the sample. So now I'm just going to keep on going, fill in all the spaces with the straight stitching, and then enjoy the texture when it's finished. Here's my finished sample of continuous square spiral. It requires a lot of turning, but the results are worth it. I quilted this continuous square spiral design on the quilt shown behind me called SWAK, which stands for Sealed with a Kiss. The pattern and the step-by-step quilting plan for this quilt can be found in my book, Piece and Quilt with Precuts. So what I did when I was making this quilt is I made a smaller practice sample and I actually quilted the design a little bit wonky. Sometimes I like to work out ideas on practice samples first. You can quilt this design straight, you can quilt it wonky. To keep it straight, I followed the seam lines as a guide. To make it wonky, all I worried about was making sure that I had nice sharp angles. Either way is totally fine, and you can always change up your quilting plan as you go. So be sure to check out the description box for links to everything I mentioned, some bonus content, and keep continuing to practice. We're about halfway through the series, and I've created a playlist where you can go back over and over again to see all of the videos in this series. I'll continue filming them as long as you continue watching them. Until next time, happy quilting.